Hello, everybody. We'll get started a few minutes after the hour. I dropped a link to our agenda for today. Please sign in.
Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. We'll just get started in a moment or two, folks. The agenda is in the Zoom chat, also at the top of our Slack channel. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural call of the OpenSSF's Developer Best Practices Working Group C and C++ Compiler Best Practices Guide. Glad to see everybody here. I'm Krob. I'm the working group lead for the Developer Best Practices Working Group. We'll start off and we'll do just introductions. Again, I I work at Intel. I'm a member of the OpenSSF TAC and several working groups. And I am going to pick David Wheeler to introduce himself, and then he'll pick the next person. We'll go around this way.
Sounds like an awesome plan. So, David A. Wheeler, I work at the Linux Foundation, and I was insane enough to propose this idea a while back, but I'm hoping that other people believe it's a good idea too. Because we're not going to get rid of C and C++, or we're not going to rewrite all that code tomorrow. So, oh, darn, yeah. So, all right, Thomas Nyman.
Thank you a lot. Hello, my name is Thomas Newman. I work in Ericsson Product Security, and I suppose that makes me crazy enough to also get started on this like a year back. Randall, please go next.
Hi everyone, I'm Randall. I come from Gentoo and I work at SKF, now part of LF, kinda. And and yeah, basically that's me. Now let's see. Jonathan, you go next.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Leitschuh. I am I'm a senior software security researcher on Project Alpha Omega. I am not really a C person, but I bulk automate fixing security vulnerabilities at scale across open source. And so I'm looking for good candidates for hardening C across the open source ecosystem, potentially via bulk automation and pull request generation. And so we can take this working group's output and do more of that, hopefully, maybe.
Jonathan picks Siddharth.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible. I already have worked with CDOG. I work with the Red Hat product security team. and I have a lot of interest in C and C++, so I really like the idea, and I always found it interesting to basically even optimize and understand the compiler and the flags, basically to build the secure code. Thanks a lot, and great to be here.
And who would you like to introduce themselves next, Siddharth?
Oh, Dan?
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Dan Applequist. I work for Sneak, and I'm mostly here to observe. I'd say the last time I touched C or C++ was in 1997. So I'm not like the most active developer in that, but Sneak has a lot of products that some of which are kind of addressing that community. So I'm kind of here to see what's going on and see how we could potentially add value.
Excellent. Who would you like to go next? Dan picks James.
Sorry, I did the same thing.
Hello, yes, I'm James Fuller. I work at Red Hat in product security. Endlessly curious about all things computing and C compilers.
I will quickly observe that Red Hat was one of the inspirations. They've got all sorts of compiler flags turned on, and I just I mentioned that just because I know about those in particular. And Krob, I know you're obviously you've got a little background in Red Hat also. Yeah. Oh, look at that. But Gentoo, Debian, a number of individual projects. I think it would be great to get all these folks together.
Well, and last but certainly not least, George, would you like to go?
Yeah, hi everybody. Just picking up a kid from school, so I hope I'm audible. My name's George. I'm also with Ericsson, but I'm not a security guy. I work in our open source program office. And in that role, I've been following various openness activities. And I'm very happy that I was able to bring Thomas on board to kind of bring forward the work that I've been doing as a contribution to the OpenSSF.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time and attention on this pretty exciting topic. Procedurally, one of the most important artifacts, aside from the document itself, of these meetings are notes. Could I please ask someone to assist us in taking meeting notes, being our scribe?
I'll do it. I'll do it, and I'm hoping other people will help.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. I will be, I would like the working group members to consider helping to co-lead this project for us. So we'll need someone from the main working group to come in and kind of just help steer things as we move along. So just kind of put that in the back of your heads. So let's start off with, as Mr. Wheeler alluded to, this idea he had a very long time ago. If you could open up issue 97, and I will kind of turn the floor over to David to chat a little bit about what we want to work on.
Okay. So I'm going to just give a quick nutshell because I think actually everybody here already knows kind of what we're in, but so I'm trying to just add some quick flavor. So pretty much every Linux distribution has been over time adding various compiler flags to reduce the likelihood or impact of vulnerabilities, which is how I define risk. A number of projects, particularly larger projects or things that's critical, have been doing the same. I was unaware before we started this discussion that Ericsson had information, but I'm not terribly surprised either. It makes complete sense that Ericsson would need to do that. But it seems like everyone's reinventing this wheel, And it would be awesome if we took all the wonderful ideas everybody has had looking at this problem and put it together in one where each of us can learn from the other. I would love to get to the point where, hey, somebody's distributing some C or C++ code, as a distributor or as a key project within your organization, and here is the best possible information. And there we go.
Excellent. I noticed that we had 2 other friends tiptoe in after we did introductions. So I will let Marta and then Diana once she pops back on. Marta, do you want to introduce yourself and just say hello? Marta and Diana are here. All right. And then maybe George and Thomas, could you talk about your work at Ericsson? I know you had shared an artifact with us at the working group a while back. Could you maybe just talk about Ericsson's interest in work in this area?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I can go first, and you can fill in, George, if you want to add anything. So yeah, so I, as I mentioned, I work in Ericsson product security, and one of the sort of responsibilities of the team where I work is that we are sort of trying to provide like guidance towards other parts of the organization, including developers, on various security related topics. And the C and C++ compiler flags is like one of these areas where we have been together with my colleagues compiling this sort of set of guidance that's sort of intended to be kind of like a guidebook initially for like internal use. And sort of we have been putting together this document, and there was this idea that this could actually be useful also outside of Ericsson, and we are now at the point where we've sort of gotten the red tape sorted out. So we are happy to share this document. But from our side, I think that we would be sort of interested to understand sort of how to make this a community effort, right? So something that I want to sort of be clear about, that this is sort of like a starting point and it's not complete in any way. So we have sort of prioritized the kind of things that we have felt have been important to provide to our developers. And this means of course, it would be nice to turn on all the flags, but in practice that is not always possible, right? So the question is that what are the flags you need to prioritize, and what are the kind of like the gotchas you might run into when you try to enable this. And specifically, like one gap we felt was there, that if you actually sort of go and look into like compiler documentation, it can be really difficult to understand what's going on unless you have like already an understanding of what are the attacks in this space that these mechanisms trying to address, and kind of like the working principle behind them, because not all of them are like intuitive, because they are trying to sort of fix very specific attacks in a very specific manner. But then if you're a developer, you're concerned about that, what other effects will this have on my software or my build environment, and things like that. So so that's sort of that's sort of where we are coming from. Yeah, I kind of also sort of hope to get an understanding of like what would be like a good direction for this work, where to expand it, and then also now sort of as a concrete manner, what would be the next logical step for us to go forward. So we have this document. How should we share it in a way that it can be utilized as part of this effort?
Excellent. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything, George?
No, I have nothing to add. That was very nice summary. Thanks.
So procedurally, typically how we operate is, as we have an idea that we're trying to collaborate on together, We'll normally do that in a Google document. Kind of lends itself to many people jumping in and making edits at the same time. But our final work product, once we're done and we're happy with it, that would go into a GitHub repository that would be 100% public available. And then through Mr. Wheeler's connections, we would actually get that prominently showcased on the OpenSSF webpage. They have a guide section. So we want to make sure that that gets prominently highlighted there. And then there'll be some marketing. We would ask the OpenSSF to help us spread the word a little bit, kind of share, evangelize that this is a community effort came together, and kind of where and how to get these resources and how future people can contribute as well. But that's typically how we proceed. Is Google, the GDoc seems to be easiest for multiple edits at the same time. We can, if we want to, upload as a markdown file and do PRs and such on it, which we will do as the final version. But that tends to be takes us a little bit to work out the access controls in the early days. If we want to jump right there, if we wait on that, it gives me time to get with the operations team to get permissions set so folks can make submit and approve PRs.
Yeah, so from my side, either is fine. So I actually have a markdown version of the document already because we anticipated that this would be needed. But if you prefer to work in a Google Doc, I can just copy that over. So like the sort of like from our side, we have been working with this in an Office document. So we were using a lot of things like citations and stuff like that. Doesn't translate too well into the markdown. So I've kind of like done my best, but it needs some more love to make it sort of nice to read. Yeah, from my side, whatever you feel is the easiest way to go forward, we can facilitate that.
Well, let's ask the group, what would you be more comfortable with making suggestions and changes and additions?
There's a live markdown editor that you can use for a group that I don't remember. I remember seeing it in one of the working groups, but I don't remember what the name was. Crow, do you remember what that was?
Nope.
Anybody want to Google live markdown editor?
My policy is no kids, no animals, no live demos, no live editing of documents.
Is it Etherpad?
Oh, Etherpad. I missed that.
I usually use
maybe or something. I don't know. I mean, if it's already in markdown format, that might be easier. And it's gonna end up in markdown format anyway, so you might as well not like go back to Google Doc and then go back.
It might be if you're going to put it in Markdown, then I'd really suggest putting it in GitHub and working on it in PRs. That's the best way, honestly, at this point. I mean, considering the document is fairly well evolved.
George got it. HackMD. That's what it is. HackMD.
So, Dan suggests since it's a lot of the hard work is already done, do we want to just put it into our repo and start using PRs from there? What does the rest of the group feel about that?
Can we see the document and then make a determination? I think probably the correct answer would be put it in GitHub as Markdown if indeed it's mostly ready. But I think that would be wise to look at before we determine.
Yeah, sure. So I can of course show the document right now, and I can make it available as like a gist or something for the time being, like after the meeting. But if it's all right, I can just share.
Please.
Would you please?
Yeah,
I'm going to ignore Crow's policy. I'm all for live demos.
Hate live demos.
Walk on the tightrope. No net. As long as someone else is doing it, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I had my demo effect already in the other meeting, so now I think I've sorted my sharing out.
I've tried my luck on a few live demos and have quite a few pets. So
Excellent. Excellent. So the humiliation has already occurred, and you're just ready for it.
Yep, I'm been there. I'm over it. I'm one cat away from being a crazy cat lady. We just went around the horn.
Wonderful. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there is a big advantage of if it's in Markdown, then you've already worked through the avoiding some of the more sophisticated capabilities that don't really translate well into Markdown.
Yeah, so what we had for the Word document was that we were actually trying to do like these concise tables, which were like maximum 1 page in size, which actually was quite nice for like the internal use, right? Because you can sort of share these as sort of like handouts even, but that unfortunately that doesn't like translate that well into Markdown. So this is now a little bit uglier, but I think that we can probably sort that out.
Tables work okay in Markdown, but
I was going to say, the guidelines we're putting together at Intel use tables in Markdown.
Yeah, you can use tables in Markdown, but if you want to have like multi-line cells, it gets like a little bit hairy because you need to format it in HTML, especially on GitHub.
Yeah.
So you end up doing it in HTML, and I'm not that fond of rewriting everything in HTML at this point.
The other thing about citations, because you mentioned citations, there is a citation syntax that exists in Markdown that I've seen used. If you are looking to translate that, I don't remember what the syntax is, but the like numerical numbered citation sort of stuff is possible.
Yeah. So what I've done now is that I've done them as footnotes, so which makes them sort of clickable. The trouble with this is, of course, that the number is hard coded. So when you add something in the middle, you need to go back and update all the numbers.
Oh, that sucks.
Which isn't super nice. I think that maybe you can use like a tag or something to make it work better. But I haven't tried it with GitHub yet, because sometimes what is supported in GitHub isn't all the nice features you can.
I actually love the, put in brackets and the author name, because it always works. And frankly, if you see a name that you recognize, some of us have read a lot of these things multiple times, so if I see a reference to a certain author, I can pretty much guess, oh yeah, I know which one that is.
Yeah. So how should we do it? I guess that Randall has something to say as well.
Yes. Randall?
Yeah, sorry. I forgot what I was gonna say.
You pull your hand down and pull the hand back up when you remember.
There you go.
Yeah. Do you mind moving down to the? I think we all know why we want this things. Although I do worry about this phrase tool chain hardening, because we've got a lot of folks working on preventing attacks on the build systems, and I fear that phrase might be misinterpreted. But I mean, that's a search and replace if we want to switch to another term.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I'm not too worried about it.
I realized that we kind of started this before, like supply chain security became like all the craze, right? So, I think I mentioned this during the last meeting. So we ended up with this because it sort of has this nice symmetry with product hardening, which a lot of people at us already are familiar with. And then I think that this is also the term that OWASP uses for this. But if we prefer, that's something we of course can change. Then the question is that what is the term we prefer?
Right. So if you don't mind moving down, I'd like to see what you actually have done with, say, the tables or that sort of thing.
Yeah. So basically sort of the sort of the core of the document are these recommended compiler options sections, and there is first sort of like a summary that has sort of some rationale for why we have using this. And I'm also like a very big fan of what's already there available in Debian and Ubuntu and Red Hat and SUSE. So especially like the Ubuntu Wiki has been like a very great resource because there's some very nice documentation for that. And I think that there are pretty similar flags there, what Red Hat uses by default and what's used by default. So like none of these should really come as a surprise to anyone, right? So these are sort of flags that are already standard in many Linux distributions and even like patched into GCC as standard or by default now. So effectively what we decided to do here was that we sort of split these into these two tables. So we have the compile time checks and the runtime protection mechanisms. So this seemed to be reasonable because a lot of the developers had concerns that which one of these will actually change my binary, right? So this gives sort of like a high-level overview of what will actually have an impact on the binary and which are just static checks. And then we sort of go through each of these in turn, and we have this what used to be like a one-page table, which have now been converted for the Markdown into like these small sections. And I've sort of reproduced like the line in the table because I thought this looked quite nice, but then the sort of the longer description is now just in free form where it used to be a sort of a single cell previously. Yeah, so we have the static checks only have like a synopsis, but then when we start to get into the mechanisms that actually have an impact on the binaries, we've also tried to have like a performance implication section and a sort of like a when not to use.
Yes, thank you.
So
That's
so
the
this is
section I
maybe
was-
yeah. So this is maybe like I'm not sure what the sort of the reasonable wording for this to be. So but basically what we try to do here is that we try to document the gotchas, right? So because a lot of these mechanisms have some either like edge cases which makes the effects undesirable, or then they're just not relevant in some in some environments, right? And I think that this is sort of like a big question for me going forward is that right. So we are, you know, we have sort of specific products who are using C and ++, and we can kind of take into account like their specific requirements. But when you turn this into this sort of very general purpose document, you might have to a little bit sort of consider this, that the people reading this might come from very different backgrounds, right? So I'm sure there are a lot of people from embedded background, still developers using C and C++ in richer environments. So that's sort of like maybe one sort of open concern for me is that how do you take like these different usage scenarios into account? But that's sort of like the overall structure that we've been sort of going for.
I think the when not to use section at least has the opportunity to deal with exactly that.
So,
Oh, wait a minute. I see a handout.
Diana has a question.
Yeah. Well, so I'm actually finding it interesting that there was a lot of concern over what will modify my binary. One of the things that has been kind of a lot of, I don't know if concern's the word, but focus at Intel, because we build a lot of firmware, is which compiler flags require some level of OS support or capability, like ASLR, and which ones don't. Because a lot of the firmware, it's written in C or C++, but it doesn't have the OS level, capabilities and protections available. It's, running down below the firmware or the OS in the BIOS or device firmware or, stuff like that.
I wonder if we could make little markers. I think that's a fair point. We've already identified two cases where, hey, if you're a small embedded, if you don't have a underlying operating system, these may be less. Maybe we can have little labels or markers, and then distribute them through as a way to hint. This may or may not be more of a problem. And if nothing else, that when not to use, that phrasing, by the way, is awkward in English, but I'm struggling to find a better one. But whatever it is, whatever that section is called, I would think that could help,
Yeah.
identify those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I'd been calling it counter indications like it was a medicine, but that's
Right,
just as awkward.
Actually, my experience with medicine, I was going to mention that medicine also. I think it's contraindicators.
Or yeah, I think that, yeah.
Yeah, contraindicators is the medical term.
Yeah,
if
that's
everyone's comfortable with that's actually the typical English phrase, but it's rather technical and specialized. So
Yeah.
Jonathan,
that's
you
actually-
suggest maybe caveats?
that's actually like funny that you should say contraindicators, because contraindicators was my choice as well, but we got feedback that, you know, this is a little bit too obscure, that you should, you know, speak plain English. So,
Another one we use sometimes is anti-patterns.
yeah, but that implies that the whole thing you should never use, which is
Yeah.
probably. I like caveats, actually. That's a nice, relatively simple word.
And if anyone, the old schoolers of us on the line, there is a series of books called Topic for Dummies. And as you were reading along the book, they would have a little icon and it says, hey, you know, pro tip. So maybe we can, you know, borrow something along those lines, like David was mentioning, that we can have, you know, the caveats, or, you know, embedded people care about this, or if you don't have
Mhm.
OS, we can figure out some way to flag that. I like that idea.
That's a good idea. That can also make it more interesting when you're reading it.
Yeah, visually, yeah.
Yeah. So let's see here. Not to do. Rename to caveats. Contraindicators. Yeah. We've also got the. What was the phrasing earlier? While I'm trying to write this down, is the harden. Something hardening.
tool chain hardening, and
Yeah.
I guess that we need a better alternative for that.
Yeah. Yeah, missing, because this isn't build system protection.
Well, and we might want to talk to the GCC and the compiler folks to ask what is the phrasing, you know, that community uses, to kind of see if they might have a better word, or maybe that word is appropriate.
Yeah, like a couple of that I heard a lot is this compiler protection, but also that's like a little bit weird because you're not protecting the compiler. And then binary hardening, I think that's a fairly popular one as well.
The static code analysis ones aren't really that either. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've been pushing for is that even if you're open source, like we got a lot of folks saying, well, this shouldn't apply to us because we're open source. But if your open source cannot compile with these protections, then that's a problem. So one of our requirements that we've been kind of trying to push through is that regardless of how you're distributing it, whether it's open source or not, it needs to be compatible with these protections.
I would say it needs to be compatible. I agree. I will go further. You need to test it with these.
Oh, shocking. No, it compiles, ship it.
Oh, if only that were a joke.
I know, right?
Yeah, so maybe like a couple of other things that I could mention that sort of we try to take into account. So one feedback we got was that a lot of times you need to be able to build the software with older compilers because you're deploying on not perhaps the latest versions of your operating system. So you're kind of stuck with whatever the platform compiler for the particular version you are deploying for is. So so this was some feedback that prompted us to actually like include like compiler versions. So this is something that I sort of did try to provide for most of them. I think there's like a couple of one, especially like the linker options that come from binutils that I'm still hunting, because actually like trying to find in which version these are introduced is somewhat like difficult, right? So you actually have to check out like an old version, and then you like see that whether it is in there or not. But that was something that that sort of we heard that was what sort of was sort of useful.
I agree.
It's awesome. And you know what? If you don't know the version it was introduced in, but it's in a more recent GCC, or CLang, you could just say GCC or CLang as a stopgap.
Yeah.
And then go back and do the analysis. But I would hate to omit something just because you can't find the historical data. It was in GCC 0.3 to start with.
Yeah, and that's actually like an excellent point. So for us, we sort of heavily prioritize the mechanisms that are currently available both in GCC and CLang. But I know that especially like CLang has quite a lot of other mechanisms that are very interesting, but that is something that we haven't gotten around to yet. But that's sort of maybe one thing that I have a sort of at least like a wish, right? That by putting this out there, we could actually get people to contribute similar descriptions for those as well. I think that there is like a lot of these mechanisms that could be included here, but yeah, we've basically had to prioritize what we spend time on. And then another thing is that I know that there are also like a lot of different opinions on what to use, right? I think that we already got into this, that should you use Fortify source level 2 or Fortify source level 3? I sort of we sort of, again, from the point of view of this document, we have sort of had to like pick something which is like the recommended one, but then that doesn't stop you from, of course, including the other options as well, right? So for like the stack protector, you have like these different variants, but what we sort of try to capture is that what is the difference, right? And I think that that's maybe like the sort of the interesting part that we hope to be able to like provide, in that you at a glance get an idea of why are these different and why should I pick one in favor of another.
One thing we might want to think about, at least my view has kind of been, and it's sort of arbitrary, but if it's been in GCC and Clang for the last decade and a half, then you really should be having no major excuse not to use it. I mean, if you've got an OS kind of compiler version older than 15 years, you got bigger problems.
Yeah, there are folks in that circumstance, but I'm guessing that this document is not going to be their first
No.
the first thing they need to deal with.
Yeah, and yeah, maybe I can skip over these, but I hope that I will when we make this available, I hope that people can take the time to read through and provide like feedback like this, right? So and I'm sure there are also mistakes, right? So it's and I think that we can hopefully get to fixing those before publicizing this. Then another one, which is sort of like something that we also started but is very incomplete yet, is sort of like discouraged compiler options. So currently we only include this the RPath mechanisms, but this is sort of a little bit as a placeholder as well. Don't know how controversial this will be, but I sort of am maybe of the opinion that if there are like these problematic options that definitely need special concern from a security point of view, if you're using them, they could be part of a document like this as well.
I like the idea of discouraged. I will say that, for example, RPath, I mean, so much depends on your specific cases. If you know it's going to be on this OS kernel and this system and specific, I mean, you know, it's part of a box you sell. A lot of these things, is that really a problem? Probably not. On the other hand, if it's a broader kind of general purpose system, you know, I think lots of folks discourage our paths. So
Yeah, I guess this is something that could be sort of use a sort of a caveat section as well, right? So, but here the caveats could be that this is actually like okay in some scenarios.
Or maybe
as well.
describe it as context specific.
Yeah,
Because yeah, there's some things that it makes sense in like a couple of specific contexts and could be a very bad idea in others.
yeah, I think it's okay to say discouraged in the sense that, you know, you don't want to use these in general. There are obviously reasons that these options exist. So, you know, there are cases where they're fine or even really the right tool, but basically you only want to use them in certain cases.
Yeah.
or they have like this requirement on your operating environment, which is a little bit broader than what you can maybe take into account when you're like picking the option, but sort of you need to take into account when you go into deployment, right?
Right. Now, I didn't look near the beginning, but do you have a TLDR copy this into your compiler flags near the top?
So yeah, we have like this big table, which basically has
copy
sorry?
paste.
Sorry?
Okay, I'm looking for the too long didn't read. Basically, the paragraph that begins and says, if you don't read any of this, copy this line into your compiler flags. Go.
Right.
If you don't, that's a trivial thing to add to this doc. I mean, basically, just take the left hand, the first column, stick it in and say, hey, you don't want to read any of this stuff? Just copy this in. Life will be good, assuming all those caveats are okay.
Yeah, that we don't have, so that could be a good addition. That
I mean, it's a couple lines at that point, but you know, if we make it so they can literally just copy paste in, frankly, I think that's a good idea. But people are going to want it, so we may as well give it to them.
Well, it'll blow up or it won't.
That's right. That's right. Well, you know what? If it's decently written, for a lot of these things, actually, if you just turn on the Christmas tree of options, it may actually be just fine.
Yeah, it seems like that's very popular in Ocean. And then in the chat, Jonathan W. noted that there is some documentation that looks like it may not have been kept up to date, but there is some documentation about when these features were added, at least within GCC.
Okay, that's great. Then we can. Yeah, that seems to be like at least on the warnings. So yeah, that I think that the warnings we have a version, but I can at least double check that whether I got it right. So yeah, maybe
if you do have any questions about when something was added to GCC, then excuse me. Sorry, croaky. You can email me at jwakely@redhat.com and I'll happily find when things were added to GCC. It's probably quicker for me to do that than some of you guys.
All
Go
right,
spelunking
really
through the Git history, so I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Whoops, I just lost. If you can add that to the notes, because I don't have your.
Yeah, I added Jonathan's note to the notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And notarized it.
And then.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you're done, I wanted to do the 60-second show of an alternative. Yours is much more complete than the work that we had started, which is great. That's not a complaint. But I'd like to show some of the stuff that we'd collected, which, if nothing else, identifies some of the other sources. I think that based on what I've seen, and I'd be curious to hear what other here, I think yours is a much better starting doc than the one that we had just started. But I think that we have some information that might flow very nicely into this.
Mhm. Should I just quickly finish going
Please.
through this
Yeah,
document
please.
and then we can switch? Yeah, so I have two sections more. So the first one is the section on sanitizers. I think that this is sort of fairly obvious why we separate, right? So everything prior is something that you would want to use in your production builds, whereas sanitizers typically you'd say for debug. Again, here, I know there are a lot more sanitizers than this, right? So we've again picked the ones that are supported by both GCC and CLang, but definitely room for improvement here. And for these, we've tried to do like a similar short summary. For these, we actually have like recommended like options for ASAN, for instance, like as a single copyable line. But yeah, that's for the sanitizers. And then the last section here is a little bit of a section that didn't like really fit anywhere else. So this is about by maintaining debug and debug information in separate files. So this basically just like summarizes like how do you actually strip your symbols and create like a proper debug link. I think that this is like mostly what you do find very well documented in GCC. So we just sort of combine this to provide like the alternative for both GCC and LLVM, and a little bit like explaining text that why would you want to do this. And yeah, then there is the sort of the references here, which currently doesn't look super nice, but at least they are in the document now. But that's maybe another consideration of how do we deal with these in Markdown, because I think it would be good to have like the references.
I don't think it's just good. I think it's absolutely necessary.
Yep.
As I said, I tend to go very old school with references. You know, if pretend you have a typewriter, and you just use them all simple text, because if you do that old school, I never have problems about conversions or how does it present, or you know it's on a small screen. I can't read that.
Yeah.
You can't read any text then.
And the citations is something we can figure out. We have a couple of us here that have played with that. We can solve that. I like the fact that you've gone through and documented your work. This is amazing.
Yeah. Formatting is trivial. Finding the citations, that's the challenge.
Yeah, so that's it. That is from my side. I guess if there's some questions about this, I can maybe try and answer, but I think if not, we can maybe move forward.
I think it makes a good start. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the list we have been putting together at Intel, except of course we have the Intel compiler flags on that list, which are most of the time they're just like GCCs, except when they're not.
Yeah, I guess that's also like we got a little bit into this already in the last meeting, right? So should it cover other compilers than GCC and CLang? That's something that we have been discussing internally as well. But yeah, again, so far this is sort of what we have now. But of course, I mean, if there is like interest to extend it to other compilers, at least from my side, I think that would be a valuable thing.
If I may, when I was starting to put together our version, there's at least one, and I think several, but at least one source which had gone through the Microsoft C compiler. The challenge with that is that it's a totally different beast with mostly completely different. I mean, there's almost no overlap in what the flags look like. Now, some of them do the same thing, but because syntax, it's like, hey, here's C and here's Java, or here's the C and here's the Python version. There's nothing begins. They all begin with slash, not dash. They all have different letters. It's
and I do have a list of the Microsoft flags that we could probably use as starting point if we want to include it.
Okay. My guess is that would be easier if we ever were going to do that, to just make that a completely separate document, simply because
Yeah. It's way
everything's
less
different.
painful.
Right. I could certainly see entertaining one compilers that attempt to be compatible. Like CLang and GCC have a policy of trying to use the same flags for the same things. A lot, and I think the Intel compiler, with exceptions, but at least more recently, they have tried to use the same flags for the same things, and it wouldn't be that horrible.
Yeah.
And as we move forward and get the document staged and massaged, we can reach out to our friends in Redmond and ask them if they are interested in assisting or contributing for their community, and we can figure out how to deal with that if we get any contributions in that area. Kind of
And
make
we've
sure
been-
that it follows the same style
Right.
sectioning.
Right.
And we've been putting together ones for some of the other programming languages, C# and Java and so on. But they have such a comparatively tiny number of flags and settings compared to C that it's kind of it's a lot less effort.
Yeah, so I would propose, I like the scope that this has already. I think we should definitely entertain adding the Intel C compiler if somebody's willing to do the work. Because I've actually used the Intel C compiler, but it's been a while.
I think actually on the documentation that I already have, most of that work's already done. So that might not be a big lift.
I just want to mention real fast, if anybody runs into a case where they're like, why is this particular C hardening flag not enabled by default? We should really do that. Come talk to me, and we can try to reach out as Project Alpha Omega to begin a discussion, chats with some of these organizations, to try to encourage them to do that. I'm really truly not a C expert. I would tap into your knowledge, but we can work together to have those conversations and try to come up with convincing arguments to convince these organizations to consider making those changes.
Yeah, I can maybe say so much that, so I mentioned that one of these things that we sort of didn't do is spend time on the CLang only options, right? So we spent more time now, or we prioritized the one that have cross compiler support. One thing that I know with some of these features is that, which makes it a little bit difficult in navigating, is that a lot of them are maybe more experimental, and they may be done as a prototype for an academic paper or something like that, and that makes it a little bit difficult for someone on the outside to tell that is this feature actually something that's supported, right? So is it actually stable now, or is it kind of like a prototype which is just in there, and you really should be careful if you want to enable that. So I think that might be sort of very useful feedback to get from these projects, that what sort of their perceived status of specific features. And then another, which I would really want to expand this document to, and that's sort of architecture specific flags. So right now we don't cover Intel CET, but that's definitely something that I think should be added here. Again, this is just sort of what we've sort of felt, but we get most bang for the buck, right? If we spend time on that you can get with software support and our cross platform. But yeah, Intel CET, ARM pointer authentication, ARM memory tagging, ideally at least I would want to cover all of those.
So we're running short on time. So what I would suggest is, as soon as this can be released, I would propose using this Ericsson doc as a starting point, merge in the other materials. I know that we've got the Red Hat friends, our Gentoo friends also have these kinds of things. So if we can pour the knowledge from every source into one place. That would be just awesome.
So actually, I have a couple pieces of homework. So Thomas and George, if you can, if you could get us a copy of that uploaded to the GitHub repo, and I posted a link in the chat and also in the agenda, so we can stage the document so people can start to take a look at and think about. Secondly, in the meeting agenda, if you haven't, please get me your email and your GitHub ID, and I will work with the operations team to get us set up so that we can start to work and submit PRs and whatnot. So in the near future, we'll be able to kind of operate like a normal project with PRs and whatnot. And then for next time, we'll start off and we'll show the existing document that David had put together, just to kind of see if there's any additional information we want to start to fold in. And then if anyone else has any alternate artifacts they want to share that we want to try to figure out how to incorporate, or if there's different perspectives we need to address. Anything I overlooked? Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Croc, where do I find the meeting minutes? Sorry, I joined late. If you posted in the Zoom chat, I didn't.
Yeah. There you go, sir.
We all know this issue. Thank you very much.
And so the trick, and I think it was actually Dan that showed me this, within all the OpenSSF Slack channels, we typically pin the meeting notes to the top of the working groups channel. So that's another trick. And then I've been trying to get the operations team to put the meeting agendas in the meeting invite. We'll get there eventually.
You know, even if you don't have the agenda, just the link to the notes means you can click in and immediately see the agenda. So right. So thank you all for your time and attention today. I'm very excited about this project. I think we're going to add some real value to the community as this gets ready. And I really want to thank Thomas and Erickson for starting us off in an amazing spot. Looking forward to collaborating with everybody. Yeah, and before we go, Crope, one of the things on the agenda was, hey, please think about co-leads.
Right.
So I would love to kind of get that burr into people's bonnets, if you will.
Yeah, if we have any working group members that have contributors or collaborators, please reach out to me to help express your interest in helping us herd the cats. That'll be very helpful.
I thought you said you didn't have pets.
Oh, I have a giant angry cat.
Not just
All heard of them.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you for coming today, and I'm very excited about this. Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the positive feedback. I'm sorry for taking so much time, but I hope we can
this
continue.
is great.
This has set us up far ahead of where we were scrambling around in the past. So this is excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and let's think offline on the practicalities to try to get this available to everyone and get the comments flowing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.